All right, picture this for a second. It's the dead of night. Inside this dimly lit room, with just a single flickering candle, there's a 100-year-old man taking his final breaths. Now, standing quietly in the corner, just watching and waiting, is a figure with a long white beard. The very second the old man passes away, the bearded figure springs right into action. He immediately cuts open the freshly deceased body, extracts the internal organs, and furiously starts writing 30 pages of incredibly detailed anatomical notes. But here's the crazy part. He writes every single word entirely in reverse. This wasn't some kind of madman. This was Leonardo da Vinci, history's most cursed and misunderstood genius. And today, we're going to look at the side of him that your history textbooks completely left out.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to completely shatter the conventional image of history's most brilliant mind. We're moving way past the smiling Mona Lisa to decode the dark, forbidden, and deeply guarded secrets of Leonardo da Vinci. We're going to unpack his chaotic genius and uncover truths that were, quite literally, hidden in plain sight.
So, let's jump right into Section 1, the Forbidden Notebooks.
You know, for centuries, the true depth of his intellect was locked away, practically buried with him. Leonardo actually produced an astounding 13,000 pages of notes during his lifetime. But these weren't just standard everyday diaries. They were written backwards, from right to left. You could only read them by holding them up to a mirror. He hid the secrets of the universe in there, from the supposed location of the human soul to the exact mathematical formulas for beauty, totally away from the eyes of the world. It was his brain, literally poured out onto paper.
Fast forward a bit to 1580. An Italian artist named Pompeo Leone buys this huge stack of seemingly cheap papers. But when he opens them up, he is absolutely shocked. He finds all this mirror-written text, designs for technology like helicopters and machine guns that wouldn't exist for another 400 years. And chillingly, dried bloody fingerprints smeared right across the pages. But then, Leone makes a catastrophic mistake. He completely reorganizes these 13,000 pages into two separate collections, the Codex Atlanticus for all the science and the Codex Arundel for the art and anatomy. And by doing that, he mixed up all the dates and topics, forever destroying Leonardo's brilliant original structure.
Now, what's absolutely fascinating is what 19th century scholars found when they finally started digging into these chaotic, messy collections. They noticed three distinct, seriously eerie patterns. First up, anti-Bible anatomy. He had these highly accurate drawings of a baby in the womb and the human heart that completely defied the strict religious dogma of his time. Second, sabotaged inventions. He drew these terrifying weapons, but deliberately included fatal flaws in the blueprints, like reverse gears on a tank. It's almost like he was leaving a secret code. And third, bloody masterpieces. Hundreds of sketches and paintings were left half-finished, stained with the actual dried blood of corpses.
Which brings us to Section 2, hiding from the church. So why on earth did he encrypt his genius in mirror writing and hide all these discoveries? Well, to understand that, you really have to look at the life-or-death stakes Da Vinci was dealing with. Back then, the church had absolute, unquestioned power. In 1513, Leonardo was already being flagged as anti-religious. Decades later, in 1600, a man named Giordano Bruno was burned alive just for claiming the sun was the center of our solar system. And in 1633, Galileo was imprisoned for his scientific claims. If Leonardo had published his true anatomical findings, or his proofs about the Earth and the sun, he would have been tortured and executed without hesitation. He wasn't hiding his work because he was crazy. He hid it to survive.
Let's look at where this all started in Section 3, Birth of an Outcast. To truly get inside his head and understand his obsessive secrecy, we have to go way back to 1452, to a small village called Vinci. Leonardo's beginnings were honestly steeped in trauma. He was born illegitimate to a wealthy father and a peasant mother. Because of that illegitimacy, he was completely denied formal schooling, denied any inheritance, and essentially abandoned by his parents. To make matters even worse in the eyes of society, he was left-handed, and believe it or not, the church literally considered that a devil's trait at the time. So he was a total outcast. But, this isolation forced him to find a whole new way to understand the world. Since he couldn't learn traditional letters in a classroom, deep observation of nature became his very first language.
And that intense observation, it led to some jaw-dropping insights at a remarkably young age. Get this, when he was just 12 years old, he's staring at a tree, and he actually births what we now call Leonardo's rule. He realized that the thickness of a tree trunk is exactly equal to the combined thickness of all its branches. And that's not just a fun little nature fact. It's a pure mathematical principle known today as the conservation of network flow.
Think about that. At 12 years old, he was mapping out the exact same flow system that governs human arteries, modern city traffic, and even how internet data is distributed today. Just incredible.
His whole worldview was just fundamentally different from everyone else's. Where an average artist of his era looked at a running horse and just saw a beautiful animal they wanted to paint, Leonardo saw pure physics. He saw force distribution, tendon extension, and rotational symmetry. He was out there decoding the raw physics and biology of the world long before giants like Newton or Galileo even had the vocabulary to describe it.
And this deeply scientific approach to art, it made him terrifyingly good. At 14, he was apprenticed to the master artist Andrea del Verrocchio. Verrocchio had young Leonardo paint just one single angel in the corner of his masterpiece, The Baptism of Christ. Leonardo applied his deep understanding of nature and dimension straight onto the canvas. The result was an angel with such profound psychological depth and realism that Verrocchio looked at it, realized he had just been totally surpassed by a teenager, and famously declared, "I will never touch colors again." He literally quit painting forever.
But then, things take a really dark turn in Section 4, a life-altering scandal.
Just as his star is rising, disaster strikes. In 1476, an anonymous note gets dropped in a tip box near the Florence Cathedral accusing Leonardo of a homosexual affair. In 15th century Florence, this was a massive deal, a severe crime punishable by years of imprisonment, brutal torture, or even being burned at the stake. He barely escaped with his life, and that was likely only because a nobleman was also implicated in the accusation. But the damage was done. The intense societal shame and the sheer raw terror of the event completely alienated him. The innocent, curious boy was gone. The trauma of that brush with death birthed a deeply protective, almost obsessive mindset. He actually locked himself away for 4 years, declaring, "I isolate myself so that the failure of the world cannot reach me." It's heartbreaking, really. His notebooks became his only true companions. He locked his entire existence, his questions, his fears, his immense genius, strictly inside those pages.
And that intense isolation leads right into Section 5, decoding the human machine.
Now totally cut off from society, Leonardo transformed. He stopped being just a curious artist and became this obsessive, relentless scientist determined to decode reality itself. By 1489, this obsession actually led him to illegally smuggle corpses, all just so he could understand the human machine. I mean, he mapped the 4 ventricles of the human brain with such insane precision that medical historians today compare his sketches to modern MRI scans. And he did this 500 years before the MRI was even invented. He didn't just paint faces either. He calculated the exact geometry of beauty, dividing the face into 3 perfect symmetrical parts. To him, beauty wasn't some abstract feeling. It was a hardcore mathematical formula.
And he took this obsessive science and fed it right back into his art. He realized that light doesn't actually create harsh, rigid outlines in nature. It creates gradients. This realization led directly to his invention of sfumato, an artistic illusion where rough edges seamlessly dissolve into a smooth gradient of light and shadow. He was essentially applying the inverse square law of light to a flat canvas, sculpting these incredibly realistic figures using optical physics rather than just drawing borders.
But here's the thing. As he decoded the world, this massive internal conflict bubbled up. On the one hand, you've got the peaceful vegetarian, a guy with so much empathy that he'd actually go to the market, buy caged birds, and just set them free. But on the other hand, you have the war engineer, a man who literally filled his notebooks with blueprints for terrifying, civilization-destroying weapons of mass destruction. It's a staggering contradiction that has puzzled historians for centuries.
So it leaves us with this really provocative question. Was Leonardo da Vinci a hero or a villain? Despite single-handedly pushing human knowledge centuries into the future, across anatomy, physics, engineering, and art, why did this legendary genius die feeling like his own life was a massive failure? Was it the heavy burden of all those secrets he couldn't share, or the pure tragedy of having a mind that was just too advanced for its own time? Think about that as you reflect on his incredible legacy. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the world around you.